Welcome to the Almost World podcast. I'm here with Paul Misell. He's from the United Kingdoms, and we're going to talk about non-duality. Paul, can you introduce yourself?
Hi there, Elmo. Thanks for having me on. So I'm from the UK, a mid-40s gentleman who is an aspiring author, currently working on a piece called The Whole, which centers on the idea of non-duality and related topics.
So when you say non-duality, is it more about ontology?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And when you say non-duality, is it in the spiritual sense or more secular philosophical definition?
I would say it's both, because I see non-duality and idealism essentially as arriving at the same place through a different route. Mm-hmm. So the non-duality route is the more spiritual thing, where it's more about transcending or losing the mind, where the idealism point of view is more about using the mind. So you would go through the analysis and the empirical support, etc., to come to the conclusion of whether or not you think it's a superior ontology to the other options currently available. Which isn't to say that it's superior to a sense of humble metaphysical agnosticism, to say, ultimately we don't know. We only have our interaction with reality to go by. We can't really peek behind the curtain and come outside of our own conscious experience to see what's truly going on behind the curtain. But I think we can make inferences. I think that we can look at certain evidence and we can analyze theories, and we can, for example, comparing materialism and dualism and panpsychism, solipsism and idealism, we can rank them. We can put them in a certain hierarchy and say, well, if we assume this, it creates these problems. If we assume this, we've still got problems, but it's got fewer problems than this one. Or we might look at, say, for example, parsimony. We might say you get more bang for your buck if you favor this assumption over this one. So there's lots of analysis that we can do, and looking at what the evidence supports. Like I say, not to come to a certain conclusion, but just to get a sense of which is the best inference ontology-wise.
Is there a difference between the substance of consciousness and spiritual substance?
And what substance, sorry?
Spiritual substance.
Oh, that's interesting. There probably is, but that's beyond my remit. I tend to view them as being close enough, from my perspective anyway, that the distinction isn't something that I've particularly gone too far into. So I would say the uncertainty doesn't just apply to idealism, that the extra step to take from idealism to theism, that really depends on your definitions, what your criteria are for calling something a god. For example, if it has to be supernatural, then non-duality isn't really going to that place. Non-duality is saying that there is a single consciousness behind everything, but it's natural. There's no sense by which idealism and non-duality is claiming supernaturality. So if that's a criteria for you that it has to be in order to call it a god, then you can't really call it a god. So if it has to be anthropomorphic, if it has to be a deity, a mind isn't really that, especially if it's not necessarily a human mind. If it's more cosmic, universal mind, then you're not really necessarily talking about a man-like thing. You're talking about something that we have, consciousness, but it's not necessarily, it's not a person as such. So if God for you has to be a person as well, and a supernatural person at that, then, you can't really give it that label. Personally, rather than discard the label, I'd rather reclaim it. And I would rather say the mystical concept of God, where it is this sense of the primordial mentality, fundamentality behind it all, then that is what I think is the original conception. And so I think it's kind of been hijacked by religions, modern religions, rather than cede that particular linguistic territory. I would much rather say, no, this is God, but it's just not as we have come to be familiar with the concept. You know? A lot of people take a more kindergarten approach to God, so that it's like a sky fairy, bearded wizard, wish granting, punishing, and all of this stuff. And it's more that I think comes from taking the narratives very, very literally, which I don't think was the original intent. And even if it was the original intent, I think we can get more value from it if we take a more metaphorical view. If we look at things such as religious narratives as being the finger pointing at the moon, rather than being the moon or the finger itself. And the literal thing, I think, is too much literalism is to focus on the finger and to say, hey, you're saying that's the moon, and that's not a moon, that's a finger. It's like, well, maybe you're missing the point here, but maybe the finger is pointing at something. And, most dogs don't understand when you point something to a dog.
So your worldview reminds me of monism or pantheism.
Yes. Yes, it's a monism, and it's very similar to pantheism. I would call it panentheism.
Panentheism.
Which adds a little bit extra to the pantheistic view. So in pantheism, God is immanent, all in everything. And everything is God. Nature is God, essentially.
There's no difference between God and nature. There's no fundamental difference.
Panentheism.
That's what pantheism
shows nature as a expression of God. You could view nature in panentheism as the body of God, but that behind that body there is a mind. In the same way that we have both body and mind, panentheism looks at God as having body and mind. So the mind is transcendent and the body is immanent.
So it's more like you're saying that consciousness is the fundamental substance of the universe, right?
Yes.
And that the definition of God that we humans have had, we mainly have been too literal about it, and have put anthropomorphized it. But humans have sort of arrived at the point, in a way, or at least adjacent to it, which is that this panentheism concept or definition is actually that your hypothetical right one, the right definition for you. Would you say that that's a
really good synopsis?
So can you tell me, if I came up to you, right, and said, but my consciousness has experienced God in real life, right? It's a phenomenological proof, right? After death experiences, or I'm talking to God, praying Him, I can hear Him. How would you include that as evidence of some sort of panentheistic nature of the universe, like how humans sort of connecting with the universe, or at least like being part of it temporarily?
Well, I would certainly take your report seriously. And I would want to know more. I would want to listen to what the experience you're reporting means to you, what happened in your experience that you're recalling. Was it like a numinous experience where you your sense of subjectivity became less personal and more transpersonal, so that you were one with the world and with others, and that's a very widely reported experience, the whole numinous experience, the transcendence. You call it, some people call it a psychedelic experience or a shamanic experience. There's lots of
or ego death.
Yeah. If you've had like an awakening, an enlightenment experience where maybe through meditation or through some electromagnetic device or ingesting some mushrooms or cactus tea or something, and you went through this process of like, I experienced God. And it's the only way I can describe it is to say that I experienced God, because I felt so deeply this inner sense of oneness with all,
with the universe.
That yes, that I am, that the small sense I is just a construct, and that the scales fell from my eyes and I experienced oneness, true oneness, deep in my personal experience. I knew God. I didn't just conceive of God. I experienced the Godhead. You know, I experienced transcendence. I experienced oneness with not just this confined self, but, you know, I mean, you don't even necessarily have to use the religious language. We could call it the force. You know, the force is, it surrounds us and binds us. It's behind all things, you know. There's lots of different ways. Some people call it source. Some people say, because they don't want the baggage of the God word. They just want to call it source. They want to say, I believe in something, some fundamentality, and I've experienced it directly through a non-dual awakening, through maybe self-inquiry or something like that. And I've just kind of like, I've had this transcendent state, and I feel that it was realer than real. The world of concept and putting labels on things and just describing them in more sort of material terms is more of a construct, and that reality is deeper than that. It's prior to that. It's something very fundamental, mental in nature, that, you know, we are all one, and that this oneness isn't just simply dead, inert material.
Interview ko tayo.
It's conscious. It's a living. I don't want to say breathing, but it's life. You know, life is all. It's all one. It's all mental. Yeah, and we all know life is mental, right? In a different way. Like, we would just say life is mental. It's like, if you mean it in a different way, you can say life is mental. But like, it takes a little bit of unlearning to get from a perspective of cultural dominance of a materialist or physicalist ontology to get to a space where you can even consider that consciousness could be fundamental, you know? Because that sounds, when I first encountered these ideas, I thought they were absolutely off the wall. I thought it was batshit. Excuse me. Can I swear? I don't know if I can
It's fine.
swear.
It's fine.
I thought it was crazy. I thought it was just, you know, how can you even like consider consciousness just emerges? That was my position as an unthinking materialist. It was just to say, like, it's emergent. It's a function like digestion, and that's what a lot of people still think, and many still think that there is evidence for this as well. There are people that will say, well, we can do brain scans that will show us what you're thinking about, what you're looking at. And there's this distinct correlation between brain activity and mental conscious states. And no serious idealist is denying this. There certainly are a lot of correlations, you know, and we're making groundbreaking progress on establishing correlations between mind and brain. But a correlation doesn't derive a causation. So there's no evidence just from correlation itself that brain activity generates mind activity. It's just a case that we know that there's some relationship because of the correlation. So if the brain is the source, that's one way in which they would correlate. But also if the brain was the image, they would correlate too. So under idealism, when I'm looking at a scan of your brain to tell me what it is you're thinking, what I'm doing is I'm viewing an external perspective of your internal mentation. Okay, so for you, what you experience is experiences. You are having perceptions, thoughts, memories, ideas, and all of that experiential stuff. But from outside of your own conscious perspectives, how that presents to me from that second or third person point of view is as the physical matter of your brain activity.
Can we go back to the start, and I'm curious, like, what led you to focusing on non-duality? It's certainly something that's very specific when it comes to like philosophy. You could just have called yourself an agnostic and be done with it, and like focus your time and money.
I very much was agnostic. So a brief history then. We'll go through. So I was born into a family where there was like casual religion, like I would say a socially Christian family, the type where you sort of like you go to church 3 times at least in your life. So when you get your head wet, when you get wet, and when you're in your box. So those are your three main ones. And if you have trouble in the meantime, then you can always call. But we hope that you don't need us, sort of thing. It's very much like a social religion, and you don't even have to necessarily believe all of the stuff. You know, it's just more of a tradition and a community thing than it is anything else. So around about the age of reason, I don't know whether I was sort of like 6, 7, or 8, somewhere around there, when I shared all of my beliefs in things like the Easter Bunny, like pixies and Father Christmas and his elves, I I had a similar sort of thing exactly the same time with all of the spiritual side of religion. I was like, nah, there's nothing in that either. It's all just made up things to keep people behaving better and all of this stuff, maybe to explain some phenomena that people who don't like not having explanations for. And I just wasn't buying any of it for a good, I don't know, a couple of decades. So I would have described myself as a socially Christian agnostic atheist at that point.
Interesting.
I'm not definitely saying there are no spirits or anything, but I have no evidence for it. And, it's all nice stories and it's nice aesthetics. And I can see, I didn't have a problem with going to a school assembly and mumbling a few mumbles and singing a few songs. That was all fine. So yeah, I would have described myself as like a cultural, social Christian, but with none of the metaphysical beliefs or spiritual beliefs or any of that. I was pretty convinced, actually. I would say I was like 99%. Like there are no gods, no spirits. I think it's just stuff. The world is just stuff. It's just science, and we've got good explanations for a lot of the things we don't have explanations for in the past. So things started to change for me when I met a best friend who was much more into the spiritual side of life, and we had like a whole series of like fireside chats. This was a female best friend. It was a platonic friendship, but we spent a lot of time together and like really put the world to rights and like spoke through lots of different things. So a few years into that, when I was approaching my mid-20s, there was a death in the family. And left behind was an uncle and 2 cousins when my auntie passed. So a few days or so after that, it caught up with me and I had my grieving process. But I felt like I'd kind of been primed by all of these chats with a more spiritually inclined person to maybe have a more open-minded approach to stuff. And I found in my grief that I was mad at something. And through gritted teeth, I looked through the window and I felt so bad about that husband and the 2 kids left behind that I was furious. I was like, give me what I was back. Something or someone had taken, and like I was angry. So I didn't even begin to believe in a God again until I was mad at it. Right? But partially because I was mad at it, I was like, well, what are you mad at? And I started to ask myself the questions. And then I had almost like what I might describe as like a Damascus Road type experience, because at light speed, all of the questions that I had popped up and the answers popped in. Things like, don't I have to believe in like a whole bunch of other traditions as well if I'm going to believe in a God? And without knowing what it was, the idea of religious pluralism, of perennialism, just came as the answer. Just like this sense that each tradition has a piece of the puzzle, and they're right about some stuff and wrong about some stuff, but there's a common theme that unites them, and that's the truth. Not necessarily the one particular tradition has the whole thing. Maybe one does somewhere, but each have at least a piece of the puzzle. And then I was like, but what about science? What about evolution? I don't want to give up those beliefs. I mean, I don't even see them as beliefs. I want to accept those things. I don't want to have to. And then it came to me, there isn't necessarily a contradiction. You can keep all of your scientific learning and still have that spiritual side. All what changes is you don't necessarily take a very literal interpretation of things like Genesis, which I see as poetry. I see Genesis as being a mythological poetry. So I don't take it as a history book. I don't take it as a science book. I take it as just like, can you get value out of this? Is there some pointer toward psychological, philosophical truths, towards something profound? You know, can you grant it a bit of artistic license and get value out of this writing rather than just throw it all away? You know, which a lot of people want to do. There are a lot of people who are like, well, if it's in denial of science or it's in denial of history, then we don't need it. Just get rid of the whole thing. And a lot of people, on the other hand, they want to take the whole thing completely seriously, completely literally, abandon science if it contradicts it, and all of this stuff. And somewhere in the middle, you've just got this idea of like, well, like, if we don't take it too literally, we take it seriously, but not literally, then maybe, just maybe, there are some profound things that can be found woven through the narratives. You know, there are perhaps there are jewels in the bathwater, or there's a baby in bathwater. So, do we want to get rid of the bathwater? Absolutely. We don't want to have to deny science. We don't want to have to go along with religious fundamentalism and encroaching on everybody's rights because it says so in some tome somewhere. You know, like all of the anti-woman stuff and the anti-gay stuff and the anti-this, the anti-the other. We don't necessarily need to take all of that along with taking, hey, maybe there is some pointings here. Maybe, you know, something's true.
It seems like you've found sort of a middle ground between hoping that maybe there is an afterlife, but it's a panentheistic one, where when we die, we're going to be part of the universe and we're not going to totally disappear, right? But also at the same time, like you still want to stick into science, right? Like with being scientific and not believing in literal things like magic that just are too far away from any epistemological method that can be tested and proven. It seems that you found a middle ground, and I agree with you. Like, for me, religion still has value to humanity, right? There are so many things that science cannot answer, and we have to go to look towards religion and philosophy to answer them, right? Like, science can never, in the next 1,000 years, science might never give us the answer of the meaning of life, morality, objective morality or subjective morality, afterlife, right? We don't even know how the brain works, right? And so I think it's part of human nature to be able to find tentative answers for the abyss, because we just don't have, we just can't live not knowing, right? And that's why I don't dismiss religion for me, I prefer just being honest but I go to Christian events, to my former church. I mingle when I went from time to time. It's for me, like, as an atheist, do I really have to stop them from? Does it really matter if I change their mind or not? As long as they're happy, right? And do I really have any alternative answers that could help them in this limited life that they have, right? Or they're not people that are willing to spend their finite time in life focusing on things that I myself can never answer, or any human, like with the technology and the pace that we have. And so that's why I never dismiss religion or philosophical argument, especially when it comes to God. But I guess, like, we all differ in the things that in our standards of evidence that we accept, right? What is sufficient for me, it might not be sufficient for you. So what do you think is sufficient evidence to like that would satisfy your scientific mind?
A lot of people, I think, conflate the idea of evidence with the idea of proof. So there isn't really any proof in science. There's only evidence. And new evidence tomorrow could overturn the evidence from yesterday, essentially. We could be working on a best fit theory with all the evidence that we've so far collected, and then suddenly somebody does couple of experiments in the Large Hadron Collider, and our thoughts about the interactions between an electron and a muon are no longer valid, right? Because a new phenomenon's been discovered.
Mm-hmm.
So, the best we can do scientifically is evidence, and is a theory that is constantly failing to be disproved.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how science evolves. Religion, I think, evolves, but it evolves slower and not always in a positive direction. And a lot of people, I think, like to use religion as a scapegoat. Essentially, the actions of people can be categorized in terms of religious actions and scientific and technological actions. But it's all people. People is the reality. And so what we do with our religions comes from who and what we are, comes from human desire. So if we use our religions to dominate and to oppress, then like better people would have made better use of their religions. Same with our scientific and technological developments. If we use them to dominate and to oppress, to create surveillance technologies and mass extinction events and genocidal weapons tech, like, there's no difference, I see, in how we apply our science and technology and how we apply our religions. It's basically down to who and what we are, and our goals, our drive, and that is a very mixed bag. There's the good, the bad, and the aesthetic within all of us. They call it like the monsters and angels in the human heart. And I think that the religions that take a balanced view of that, I think, are more sophisticated. So, for example, Taoism, where you talk about the yin and the yang and the balance there, and the fact that even within that there is like the positive within each, and so you get the trying to sort of picture the the symbol, the forget what you call
Yin and yang,
the Taoist symbol, the yin yang, so I think a lot of modern versions of Christianity focus too much on our sinful nature and our fallen nature, rather than the balance, the fact that there is some spark of the divine as well within the human psyche. Maybe if you push down into those traditions, then you can find that there as well. But I think the focus, it gets a bit wayward. It's all too negative, in my opinion. This focus on sinful nature, and also one of my biggest problems with Christianity and similar religions is there's so much focus on the packaging rather than the actual content. Like the name of. The most important thing is the name of, worshipping the name of this, and like every other word drops in its name. Is that really what it's all about?
Mm-hmm.
Those are words.
Mm-hmm.
Like, shouldn't you be talking more about the content than the packaging?
Mm-hmm. Can I ask? So you have a critique of philosophy or religion, especially Christianity, Islam, right? The monotheistic religions. Which came first, non-duality or your critique of religious institutions? Did you become agnostic first because you were you just weren't, believe it just wasn't enough to believe in religion, or what, and whichever one is saying the truth, or is it that it's just because I believe in non-duality disproves religious institutions?
Well, non-duality for me, I think, is compatible with religions, but to go down a more specific route, you have to add some stuff. So the mystical concept for me is at the heart of Christian mysticism, Jewish mysticism, Sufism from Islam. It's there in Hinduism, the idea of Brahman and Atman. It's there in the Enlightenment of Buddhism. It's there in Taoism too. This is why I think of it as a perennial thing. It's not limited to one particular faith. And so, in terms of which came first, I would say my move towards atheism for a couple of decades from a very young age came first.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't find any and believe in any of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Then I had the experience that I described before, which made me much more open to
Mm-hmm.
it. And I would have called myself, had I had known the term at the time, an agnostic somethingist.
Mm-hmm.
So I went from being an agnostic atheist to an agnostic somethingist. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I felt there was something. Strongly felt there was some fire behind the smoke. And religions give us a lot of smoke. The question is there any fire that's causing the smoke? For a while, I thought maybe I was a pantheist. And then my gateway drug was when the YouTube algorithms introduced me to a fella. I don't know if you've heard of him or not. There's a guy called Muji.
Mm. I haven't.
He does these things. He does these things called satsangs, where a whole bunch of people come, and he has like his blanket over his legs, and he's got his chair and his flowers and his picture of his past master who taught him these ways, and people come with their questions. And he's a very charismatic guy. He's from well, close to where I came from, actually, but he's from somewhere in London. Ethnically, he's like a Jamaican dude, but he's from Brixton. So he's a Jamaican from Brixton in London, and he very much, in my opinion, knows his onion. You know, he's come from like a Christian background, but then traveled India and learned more about more kind of non-dual aspects of religious narrative. And so, yeah, he teaches stuff with like stories, and encourages something that they call self-inquiry, which is that to say that rather than necessarily looking for and arguing for and identifying the God per se, we're looking rather than for the nature of the self. We're looking for the looker. We're looking for who's asked, like what is the nature of what it is that's experiencing this. And during this meditative process, we find it's a case of stripping away. It's a case of saying, okay, for now, I won't concentrate on anything from the past because that's just memory. And I won't focus on those thoughts. I won't focus on any thoughts in future either. You know, I'll just be rooted in now, be aware of what I'm aware of and my breathing. And I'll focus on what is and what it is that isn't.
Can I ask you, if let's say non-duality was wrong and we're not, life is meaningless, we're literally just purely material accidents and very abnormal, and like when we die, our consciousness just dissipates and is not gonna be part of one big thing or anything. It's just the end, and it never mattered in the first place. Would you be able to live with yourself, accepting that truth?
It's interesting. I did live with myself thinking, and I was fine. I was fine with that, you know, for a good couple of decades. That's what I thought was the case. I thought that like life was like the brief candle, and that we came from nothing and we go back to nothing, like oblivion, essentially. The abyss is what awaits, and that whatever meaning we create is whatever meaning we have. You know, there's no intrinsic meaning to. Yeah, I was fine with that. Do you know what? I was probably more fine than I am now.
Really?
A lot of people think that, like, if you believe in eternity as opposed to oblivion, like if you think that you come from everything and go back to everything, rather than coming from nothing and going back to nothing, they think that that's a comfort. And maybe in some ways it is, but actually, like, I'm intimidated by it. I was absolutely fine when I thought that death was the end, right? And that was just it. Like, life was just like, I'm the little accident that's come out of a bigger accident, and I accidentally get to have a life. I was fine with that.
Okay.
And I was also pretty fine with the idea of the determination, because, like, it's not like you're going to know. If you don't exist, then what complaints?
Currently, do you subscribe to some sort of reincarnation, right? Like, when we die, our consciousness becomes part of the big thing, the one thing. And then when we when like another creatures come to life, we sort of like just merge with that or emerge from it.
I do, but I wouldn't want to just try and justify it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is more of a speculative thing.
Well, why do you believe in it if you're not just gonna justify it?
Well, it's not that I don't think I can justify it. It's just that I think I'm more confident that I can justify, for example, that idealism and non-duality is a superior ontology to the other options available. Whether or not, like, to asking about reincarnation, I think is a next step. So I do think that we can say that death is more of the end of a dissociation. So if idealism is true, I'll give Dr. Kastrup's analogy for idealism and how it works. Essentially, there's a host mind, which is the fundamental mind, and we are dissociations. We're alters. So if somebody's got like a multiple personality thing or a dissociative identity disorder, then what you will find with those psychiatric patients is that they have apparently discrete internal alters in their psyche, in their consciousness. And that's the analogy for analytical idealism for the Kastrupian view.
All right, let's take a break. All right, Paul. So let's talk about your book and what made you write it, and why do you think people should read it when it's done?
Absolutely. Okay. So I wanted to have a conversation with Matt Dillahunter, and I wanted to leave him with a sort of no skeptic, unmoved position on what I believe and why. And I developed this 7-stage conversation that I wanted to have, and that eventually morphed into the idea for the first 7 chapters of the whole. So it begins with a content warning. I feel like anything that's going to deal with existential philosophy really has to have a big old warning label about existential crises and about everybody's heard of enlightenment, but not everybody has heard of enlightenment's evil twin that they may call the dark night of the soul, or DPDR, right? Carl Jung, for example, went absolutely potty for a good couple of years after he came to the realization, well, after he changed his opinion about the nature of reality and the nature of the self. He lost his bits, right? He came out the other side with a lot of insight and a lot of useful things to tell the world, but he had a big old trouble in the meantime. And, the last thing I want to do for any of the readers of this is to let them wade into these waters without preparing themselves, without having a life belt and a whistle and all the other bits and pieces that you need to stay safe. Our mental health is very important, and our stability, and a lot of that is tied in with our sense of reality and our sense of self. And if suddenly your idea of the world gets turned upside down, if you've never even heard of the concept that consciousness could be fundamental, then thinking of it that way when you've been thinking the other way can make the ground beneath your feet feel as if it's very unstable. And, it can be a really troubling thing. The whole dark night of the soul. People can have all sorts of mental health problems if they go into existential philosophy unprepared. So there's a big old warning sign right at the top. I'm gonna make sure that I say in the introduction that the first chapter has to. Any other chapters, read them, dip in, dip out, move through. But the first chapter is essential that you read that before you go into anything else, so that you're fully prepared. So that you may need to take a break from the material. You may need to relax yourself, focusing your breath for a while. You may need to go and talk to somebody. There are many potentially disturbing ways of delving into certain ideas. And for example, I mean, if you were going to take acid, if you were going to do mushrooms or something, you would do so respecting it. You would do so with an air of caution. And it just so happens to be that there are certain thought lines, certain meditative practices that if you think about certain things for long enough, they can have the same effect. So you can have the good trip or the bad trip that you can have on psychedelics just from a thought line, just through meditative self-inquiry, and that means it's pretty powerful area of thought, but also that it needs to be respected. It's not something you can just go into unprepared. So that takes a big chunk of like preparation. I have to kind of work on a balance here so that I'm not putting people off of reading the rest of the book, but at the same time, there needs to be a warning in place. You have to have a sense of preparation. So from there, the second chapter is more focused on the language of the divine, like this whole idea of why we would or wouldn't call it a god, with a small g or a big G, and it's exploring the fact that words are really helpful in communicating ideas, but they can also get in the way. So it goes into a lot of the baggage that we have around the word, a lot of, is it appropriate to call it that or not call it that? Ultimately, I take a stance that is liberal and utilitarian to it. It's like, if it's useful to use the terms, use the terms. When it's not useful to use the terms, don't use them. That's simply my approach. Is that some people can say, no, we have to abandon the terms. We can't possibly use them. And some people are like, no, we have to use them all the time. But again, I find myself drawn to this middle way. I mean, I'm not married to the idea of the middle way in a kind of Buddhistic philosophy of really revering the middle way. But I find myself drawn there as I look for solutions. And so this idea that, yeah, we can use those words when it's useful to so do, but we can also refrain from using them and use different technology, whether that's set terminology, whether that's new age type terminology or more technical terminology. Ultimately they're tools. The words are tools, and what tools you use depends on what kind of job you want to do. Okay.
Yeah, right, Paul. I'm gonna stop you there, and it's getting late already, and I think we're over time. So maybe we could continue.
That is such a shame. Yeah. I was really looking forward to doing some more chapter breakdowns, but
yeah. Well, okay, I mean, like, you shouldn't spoil your book anyway. I think you've helped them already, and so you can look forward to it. So, Paul, it's been awesome talking to you. I'm actually a little sick right now, but I said I'll pull through, and and it's been that, no, it's fine. And it's been a worthy experience.
Any of the existential ideas that got you there?
It's been awesome talking to you. And do you have any socials that people can go to?
I'm on Facebook. And I have my own private group on Facebook as well that people are welcome to apply to join. That is called Universalism versus Rest of the World. Mm-hmm. And my name it's Paul Misell. That's MIS for Sierra ELL. So if people want to connect with me on Facebook or with the group, then that's perfectly fine. I've got nothing else that I can really plug right now. No website or anything.
And I'd like to acknowledge your special guest, your pet dog there. What's his name?
Yeah, Hogan. Hey, Hogan. Say hello, Hogan. Here we go. Yeah. Yeah, my faithful companion. He loves a bit of limelight, this one. Oh, yes. Say hello, Hoagie. There you go. Hey, say hello.
All right, Paul, it's been awesome talking to you. And have a great day.
Great. You too.